One big aspect of the Big Drift is the changes in weather. Can you give us some historical background on that winter of 1884 to 85?
Well, the big drift, now there were cattle drifts every year because in those days, open range country, uh, there were no general fences and pastures, but every so many miles, every 100 miles or so, or 50 miles or so, they would stretch uh, fences just to keep the cattle from drifting too far with winter storms. This would allow the, um, the roundups in the spring to be a lot easier because in terms of the big drift of 1884, uh, cattle drifted as far as 600 miles from uh, northern, from areas of the Great Plains, and just came down in a mass a mile wide at times, and trampled out a great path through. By the time we got to Texas, uh, Odessa area, for example, it was an 18-inch snow, which is a lot of snow for that country. But when they would hit these drift fences at that time, they would stand there and die because their nature is to retreat from a storm. And the succeeding cattle then would actually bridge the fence by climbing over the carcasses and jumping off. So it really was a remarkable incident, the Big Drift, which brought on the big roundup of 1885, the largest roundup really in Western annals, when there were as many as 300 cowboys and 1,000 horses in the remuda to bring back these cattle who had ended up on the Devil's River, the Frio River, and the Pecos River, and then began to die. It was a carrion-ridden mess there for months.
Do you think more cattle would have lived without the drift fences in place?
Well, the drift fences were both pluses and minuses. The very fact that cattle could not retreat with the storm, could not march away from the storm unless the fences were breached, meant that someone would actually stand there and freeze to death standing up. Icicles would form over their nostrils and mouth. They could no longer breathe, and cowboys would actually come along and find cattle standing up, frozen solid and dead. And so probably more cattle would have survived, but in terms of the problems thereafter, regaining the cattle, returning them to 600 miles to their home range would have been very, very problematic.
Were there any significant changes in ranching practices following the Big Drift in response to what happened with drift fences or anything like that?
It was another good 12 years, about 1896, before the country, the Pecos country and the Devil's country, began being fenced.
Okay.
Fences only came in once windmills were introduced because you had to have a water source. And so the Big Drift in and of itself did not bring about any great change. And in fact, drifts continued each year until the pastures were all fenced in, just not on that extreme level.